Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our next edition of Wildcat Wisdom Online. Everybody's just starting to join, so we're going to wait for 1 second, and then we're going to jump right into today's webinar. Okay, it looks like a good number of you have trickled in. So I think we'll get started to be mindful of everyone's lunch hour. So thank you so much for jumping on. I'm Jamie Weatherby. If you've been on our webinars before, you've seen me many times in the past. I am the Associate Director of Engagement for Alumni Career and Professional Success here at UNH. And I have the pleasure of working on and supporting this webinar series. I'm thrilled today to be joined by April Landale, class of '82. April has a long history and career in leading teams and nonprofit organizations. She is here to share her insight of her long career of being a successful, imperfect executive and all of the lessons learned from her fantastic career. More than anything, we really want this to be a conversation that we have with you. We have a great presentation planned with a ton of information. So please, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please don't wait to the end to ask them. We would love for you to be able to ask them on the spot so that you don't forget, and we can make this most tailored to everything you want to be hearing. To do that, there's a Q&A feature. You'll see a little button on your screen. You can type your question right in there. I'll see them, and I'll be able to get that into the conversation with April. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to April. Thank you so much for being here.
You bet. Thank you, Jamie. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about the long career, but it certainly has felt like that at times. Thank you, everyone. And I was really pleased to be able to come and join you today and hope that I have something that would be useful for you in your professional life. My career path has definitely been a windy one. I graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 1982 with a bachelor's of science and no real career vision. I fell into a couple of short-term teaching opportunities and found that indeed my passion was teaching. I think what I really loved about it was this blend of creativity and innovation and autonomy and mentorship. Over time, I moved into educational nonprofits and found that those nonprofits also had those characteristics. I think the other thing that nonprofits have that's really compelling for me is this ability to be maybe a little bit more nimble. So if you're implementing change, it happens a little bit more quickly and tangibly, I guess. So throughout my career in teaching and administration and later leadership, I found myself growing and advancing into increasingly higher positions. And throughout those occasionally very bumpy changes, I've experienced great challenge and growth and a lifetime of reflective learning, hence the title Imperfect Executive. So in our time together, I'd love to share some specific areas of management and leadership to consider that will hopefully help you optimize your focus and energy and help you gain insights a little bit more efficiently than I did. And I would love to reiterate what Jamie had mentioned. I hope after the presentation or in the midst, we have a good conversation because that's the real richness of our time together. So I'd love to break the presentation into 3 parts. The first is my take on what makes a good leader and how these qualities play out in a workplace. The second is how to use your leadership to optimize projects where you can achieve exponentially greater results by applying good leadership strategies in your team. And then finally, what are the projects that you're able to leverage well within the organization that help to build your team into sort of their best performance and growth? I want to stress that a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really not new. It's just, I hope, for us to heighten our awareness and reaffirm our ideas of leadership in the work that we do. So with that, we can go to, okay, so what makes a good leader? We all have our own list of traits, and these are a partial list of mine. It's your values and beliefs that define your leadership potential. It's really, and I think this is super important, it's not about what you do as opposed to who you are. So these characteristics you can bring into any position that you hold. Your ultimate hope as an employer is to identify and enhance these traits in your employees to optimize their growth And as an employee, you want to work for organizations that are going to recognize and provide leadership opportunities for you regardless of your position. Now, as I look at that list, you could argue that these are characteristics of really good people, and that's true. However, I think there are a key that for me are important in leadership. So for instance, the ability to be influential and inspirational. Unless you can mobilize a group of people towards a vision, you can't really step into leadership. And it's not about really being an introvert or an extrovert. It's just that ability to be compelling. It's also about the ability to connect people to a vision, mobilize them towards achieving it. So let's think about how these might play out in the workforce through leadership behaviors. Behaviors are really sort of characteristics in action. And as we look at this list, let's face it, these are hard things to aspire to, especially when you consider being consistent in your work and life with leadership characteristics. But being authentic is a super huge behavior of a leadership position, because it means connecting your actions to your mindset, your attitudes, and your values of your workplace and at home. Inauthentic leadership is easy to identify, and most people will find it hard to get behind and work with an inconsistent leader. Vision is something that's absolutely essential for a leader, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And one thing that I left off the list, I think, is the importance of soliciting feedback. We can all be blind to our own contradictions. Soliciting feedback really models humility, and it's in a desire to improve to your employees. When you ask for feedback, it's likely that the first time you're not going to get really direct, honest feedback. But the more you ask, the more you're modeling, and the more people are going to open up and help you by providing really honest feedback. It also sets the norm for the rest of the organization. And so if you're modeling asking and receiving feedback, then your employees will do the same. And I would say that's a skill that you may have to work on, is also receiving feedback, because often we're quick to want to put the feedback into context or provide more history, or as opposed to really being receptive and hearing it and then taking time before you might come back around the feedback. So one of the things that I learned earlier in my career was around leadership behavior was the need to model leadership behaviors that I thought everybody should adopt. And that was, I would be the first one to come to work. I would be the last one to leave. I would jump into every project to show how indispensable I could be. But beyond being really tired, really what I was modeling was being a martyr. So through some mentorship and some feedback and also reflection, I'd say, I realized that what I was really trying to model was commitment and responsibility. And honestly, that has less to do with hours that you work. And so I'm continually looking at the behaviors that I'm illustrating and making sure that they're aligned with what I'm hoping employees to also model or adopt.
So April, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So in all these things we talked about, it in a long line of a lengthy career for anybody, I'm sure there's a lot of trial and error that goes on here. And, you know, we all make mistakes, and learning from your mistakes is the key to all of that. But when you're leading a team, I feel like making a mistake can sometimes feel very detrimental, whether it hinders somebody's either respect for you or somebody feeling like you are the right person in the right seat to be leading the team. So how do you suggest handling it if along the road you do make a mistake? How do you course correct to get back to being that model leader?
That's a great question. And I've got a lot of practice in that too, if I could just throw that out there.
I think everybody does, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And well, it's really about humility. I think so often we try to be perfect as leaders, and that's just not attainable. And so the more you can share your process and how that mistake was made, and then to be able to have the tools or the reflection, solicit the feedback, have the process in place so that you have a vision for either rectifying the mistake or gaining wisdom through the process, I think is most important. And again, it's just, humility is huge, because there are there are great leaders at every aspect of the organization. And the idea to have reciprocity in learning and reciprocity in feedback, I think is huge. And so I don't want to say I made a mistake and I don't know where I'm going with it. I want to be able to say, I made this mistake. This is what I've learned, and this is where I think we need to go. Where are your thoughts on that? And then you move ahead together.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think there's a little confidence that has to come into that too, where, if you're totally impatient, that's just not going to, or you don't have a plan, that doesn't help you. But, oh, there's my favorite imperfect leader. So I'd love to play a clip from Michael Scott and see what he thinks is important in leadership behavior and what's important to him as a leader.
Okay, oh no, why is it not working?
Come on, Michael, we're counting on you.
She's so quiet. I apologize. We're trying to get the video to work. We've played with this a million times. Ooh. Oh no, bummer. I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's not playing.
Well, he's with us, and that's the important thing.
Exit full screen. Here, let's try this.
Okay.
We'll do it. No, it's not working. That's terrible. I apologize, April. We worked on this so many times for it to be sticking on us.
Well, I'll give you the cliff notes. So Michael talks about how he doesn't really need to be liked, but then he really does need to be liked. But more importantly, he really needs to be praised, which if you're an Office fan, you've seen that example time and time again. And so I think if you'd seen the clip, it's two things. It's, first of all, he modeled beautifully the idea that you can make mistakes, and with humility, sometimes he has humility, you can grow beyond that. And that also, if you're courageous as a leader, you're not always going to be liked. And that's huge. Courage is another hard but important skill as a leader. So you may not always be liked or praised, because part of what you're doing is moving your team out of their comfort zone. And it's where you all will learn and grow at an optimal level, but it's not always the easiest place to take people. So we'll give Michael a rest for a little bit.
So sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, so two other aspects that I really want to call out, because I think they're super important, and we all have opportunities to grow, and that is really around the art of listening. And so we all know great listeners, but also those that are self-absorbed. Most of us listen, and I'm so guilty of this, to confirm our own opinions, which is often a function of living in a fast-paced soundbite world. So the bullets listed in these slides are just awareness reminders. I think most poignant for me is that first bullet, which suggests that listening is not a skill, but a discipline. I think of a skill as an action that you just improve through repetition, but a discipline is something around managing your behavior. And so that's why it really takes energy and effort to grow your skills, not just to listen, but to hear. Earlier in my career, I found it hard not to mind conversations for affirmation. And so I was really just looking for people to check my gut, as opposed to looking for and listening to what they had to say. And so it's still a work in progress for me, as it is, I think, for all of us, but just being aware of that. So be attentive and respectful. Take the time to hear and really listen. And if necessary, frame the conversation. It may be that you want to get some feedback, but you've got 10 minutes around an idea. So if you have to frame it, but then really work to be present. The other behavior, I think, is this idea of curiosity. And in my mind, you can think about curiosity as critical thinking, or being imaginative, or thinking outside of the box. But what it does is inspire a growth mindset. And it's really critical to developing a vision. And that's essential for leaders. So it's your ability to move your team or organization out of their ordinary mindsets. I remind myself, or try to, that If you think you know, you're not going to ask. If you think you have all the info, you're not going to look for more. And if you think you're right, you're not going to listen to other people. This idea, the second bullet around holding the tension, it's really about recognizing the growth opportunity when opposing ideas emerge. And I think it's human nature to try to grab those ideas and work towards consensus. But if you hold the tension, you might actually identify ideas between those two opposing ideas that you can evolve and build. So take some time and hold that and let things emerge that might not otherwise have the opportunity. And then finally, I think it's super important also that experience and skills can compromise curiosity. So resist the temptation to be the smartest person in the room and see what can emerge. So as we think about the behaviors and characteristics that I've noted that rise to the top for me, I wondered if we might take a moment and have everyone sort of sit quietly and consider the following questions. So in what areas would you like to grow as a mentor or a leader? And then within the work that you do, who might support you? Or what are the resources that you might have to support your growth? And then finally, how can you be proactive and where can you get feedback? And I really wanted to play the Jeopardy song while people were doing their reflections, but we couldn't get that organized. So
we'll just take the video to work. Yeah, let's simplify this. I will also include, I think these are really great reflective questions that are beneficial to revisit throughout your leadership career. So when we do our follow-up email, we'll send you a recording of this webinar in case there's anything you'd like to revisit. But in that email, we'll also include these questions so you can keep them front of mind going forward in your careers as well. All right, and I hate to say it, I think that this will be a Michael Scott visual as well. I'm sorry about the playing of the videos.
Okay. That was my favorite one. Okay, I hope everyone has refreshed their coffee, and we'll move on to the second area of focus. So a quick recap. We've got a general understanding or awareness around behaviors and characteristics that at least are important for me, and I suspect we all share some of those. Let's think about how these are applied in an organizational setting for performance and growth. And I really, gosh, I have to say that building and optimizing your team is the most important leadership and executive task you'll have, one of the most important ones. You achieve nothing on your own. It's really a function of having a team beside you that shares your investment and your vision. So in the end, you as a leader, you're responsible for setting the vision and providing the tools, removing the obstacles to let your team perform at their best. Now, sometimes we get the gift of building our own dream team, but more often than not, you're going to inherit a team and you're going to need to provide tools and skills and opportunity for them. You may also have members of a team that are going to create challenge for you, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. So if you're moving into an established team, it's really important to avoid quick judgments or decisions. Your intuition is going to give you lots of quick feedback, and I think it may create assumptions that aren't data driven. And so one of the things that's really important is that you take the time to watch and listen and learn to truly get a sense of your team's strengths and weaknesses, their interests and affinities before you act, exclamation point. So if we had the opportunity to watch Michael Scott, if you're an Office fan and you remember when Toby returned from Costa Rica and Michael turned around and started screaming, no, 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 God, no. Michael was not illustrating, watching and learning and assessing before he acted. And he also illustrated the truth that You can't always get what you want with a team, but it's important that you work with what you have. So. So let's see. In the midst of evaluating and building your team, I want to reference a couple of resources that they're a little bit retro, but they've worked really well. They're just great foundational resources. And the first is the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. And so he thinks, uses the metaphor of an organization as a bus. And the first question that he asks is, are the employees on the right seat in the bus? So one of the things you're asking is, does the position that this employee hold utilize their strengths? And if not, obviously what you want to do is to be able to provide the skills and tools that are going to support that employee on the bus. It may be also, the second question, which is a little bit harder, is should they even be on the bus? And that's where somebody may not have the commitment for the organization anymore. It just might be difficult. And so then your job is to really still build them as employees, but you want to set some clear roles and responsibilities, some expectations, and then gather data. And this is a really hard thing to do as a manager and a leader, is to take the time to create a growth plan for an employee, but it's super important. The other thing that I think is super important is that you're continually checking in with that employee. If you've ever had to move an employee off the bus, it can come as a surprise when you have not had really good feedback and mechanisms for clarity around what it means to perform their position and given strong feedback. So you document, you communicate, and then you let the employee go. Often I found that when an employee isn't performing, they're going through, in a lot of ways, the motions of their performance. They're not really happy. And so when you set this into place, if you have good trust and respect, it actually can be a relief when you help them identify that it's not the place for them anymore. And I've had people come back and say, yeah, this is kind of a relief. I'm not happy here anymore. And then my job is to really help the exit process, to respect their commitment to the position in the past, and to move them forward out of the organization and into another position. You may also be able to move them into another. It may be that they're not happy and or performing because there's another position they're suited for, and I think we just covered that. Another trend that I've seen is when the organization actually needs a different skill set and a different position. And so I just went through this in an organization I'm with now, where we had an accounting manager, and really what the organization has needed is a director of finance. And so I took the time to listen and learn and create opportunities for that employee to rise. And then we started the conversation around the need to organizationally reform that position a little bit. And what I tried to do, and we tried to do together, is remove the personal aspect. And she could see that this was something that the organization needed. Within 6 months, we had built a position. I had her take a look at it. I invited her to apply, and she did choose to apply, but I also told her that I needed to open it up to the outside, just so there was a really strong paradigm shift between one position and moving into the next. And that can work well, where somebody can then rise and jump into this newly defined position. But in this case, the employee said, as I've reflected on my performance in the last 6 months, I can't step into this position. And so again, we had plenty of time to be able to manage the transition and manage her transition into actually another career. And so she's really excited and happy, and it's worked out really well for the organization. So once you decide if the employees are on the right seat in the bus, and should they even be on the bus, you've got a strong team. And then it's really around the structures and the frameworks that you put in place for that team. You want to make sure you have really strong roles and responsibilities. These are things we revisit every year, because as an organization changes, you want to make sure they're relevant. And then you want to develop goals and performance metrics and build in continual feedback mechanisms so that as goals change, and they do, and the priorities of the organization change, you can adapt these so there's just no surprises. And then you want to obviously empower the team to grow and succeed, provide them tools and training if they need it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, get the heck out of the way.
April, so when you talk about whether people should be on the bus at all, I think a lot of concerns of leadership, a lot of times when they do have a challenging employee or an underperforming employee, is potentially any legal ramifications that could come with needing to let somebody go, and if it feels justified or not, and if there's any repercussions to that. Can you speak to that a little bit and those concerns and how you set yourself up to be protected and success in that way?
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And the other thing is that this is something that is super hard to do. And it's something that I think weighs on me the most in the work that I do. And yet it's really important both for the employee and the organization. The first thing is really to get the data, to make sure that if you're seeing something that you can back it up with information. And so it takes time, unless it's, something that's really an actionable behavior by an employee. But if it's really just not meeting expectations, you want to have good faith that you've done everything that you can. But if that lack of performance is impacting your team and it's demotivating them, then you've got to make some moves. So data first, and then I pull a team together to make sure that I've thought everything through. They're members of other leadership in the organization, or a labor lawyer, just to go through the aspects that you've seen and gather additional data if necessary, and then build a really nice separation plan. If the organization has outgrown an employee's skill sets, it's not their fault. And so you want to, unless they say that they're not interested in growing with the organization and they have the potential, but if they don't, I feel a real responsibility to be able to mentor them forward. So creating, whether it's a severance package or some training and opportunities, or looking at their resume, whatever is appropriate. But again, I vet it against either a labor lawyer, or you can join a consortium of other nonprofits and access their resources as well. So there's definitely help out there if you need it.
So, and you kind of touched on this, but is that still true if you're looking to repurpose a role? Do you need a history of data points of maybe underperformance if you're repurposing, or is that a totally different set of circumstances?
Well, by repurpose, you're saying reform, make the position different?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple ways to think of it. If you're repurposing the role and you see the employee as somebody who can move into that role and perform, then that's just an upward movement where you would say, I'm going to build this position. I'd like you to step into it because I see the potential and the opportunity for growth. But when you see maybe somebody who's hit the ceiling of their skill set and you know that they're not going to be able to perform those functions, I still have a hard time making that judgment, which is why I offer the opportunity for them to apply for the position. But I also then want their application evaluated against others who have that training, so that I can sort of look at that comparison as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's take another minute and think about organizationally the team that you manage. Do you have the processes and structures in place to build your team? And I guess the first question is, are they the right members for the work that needs to be done? And then do you have the processes in place? And then what's the hard work that you need to do to build your team? Because this is the hard stuff. This is also where courage and leadership comes into play. So we'll take another minute with the Jeopardy song. Okay. Everybody wrapping up their thoughts? Okay, so we've taken the time to think about what are the characteristics and behaviors we want in our leaders and we want to grow in our team. Um, we've worked to assemble the right members of the team and gotten them on the bus, and we built some structures and frameworks for them to be able to perform at an optimal level. So the next thing that I think is super important is really developing the language that you're going to use to work together. And it's sort of an internal way of communicating, and it's really the expectations that you hold yourself to. So core values, I think, is really important. And we as a team went through developing a series of core values, and they're pretty consistent with, in general, it's things like stewardship and collaboration and integrity, but we use them a lot in the workplace. If I say transparency is one of our core values, and I move ahead with decisions and I haven't updated my team, they can come back and say, listen, one of our core values is transparency, and we didn't feel that in this instance. So I like the idea of building that language of values within the group that you work with. Consistent communication is huge. I'm probably an over communicator, but I really think bringing the group that you're working with along in your decision making and your ideas and the feedback that you're receiving from external stakeholders is really important, so that they're not having to make a huge leap when for you it's just really a small step. So consistent communication, and it's also making sure that your team is communicating back to you the challenges that they're feeling, the successes that they have. It's really important. Transparency is really huge. Also, the organizations that I've worked with, the nonprofits, we've always had open board meetings, and I really value that because I know that that's not something that happens everywhere. At one organization, we'd have over 100 people at the general session of the board meeting, and for me, it did a couple of things. I guess it demonstrated or illustrated the team leader as an employee reporting to their boss, the board of directors. And so it's important for your employees to see you accountable in some ways. And then it's also a function of, it's blasting the ceiling so that everyone in the organization can see what every level of the organization is thinking about, what their decision-making process is, what are priorities for them. It just helps us all sort of understand one another better. So I think transparency is great. Every team's going to hit some rough waters. And so the National Outdoor Leadership School uses something called the waterline model. And one of the things when you think about forming a team, they norm, they create their norms, which could be values, and then they storm, and that happens all the time. And then they hit optimal performance. So you can think about storming as a way to sort of challenge one another and build that trust and respect. So when our team does that, we use the waterline method, which is to your right. And when we encounter issues, I think it's human nature to jump down into the interpersonal. So you're automatically thinking about an issue that you have with somebody, or somebody's not performing or doing what they're supposed to be, and that creates friction. And so I always encourage everybody to zoom out, and let's start by asking some questions. And so the first is really focusing on structure. So for that employee who may not be performing, are they clear around what their role and responsibility is? Do they know that this is something that they should do? And if so, then we might go down into, has that responsibility been communicated clearly? They might know that it's their responsibility, but the timing is different. They have a sense that they have another month to get that done. And so I would say 80% of all issues can be depersonalized and clarified through moving through that structure and process and pattern process first. And I think we're all just really emotional people, and it jumps us down into personal interactions, and it just gives us those structures to problem solve before we jump to something interpersonal. And certainly things do enter that or intrapersonal role mode, and that's when there are a series of, there are many tools around facilitation and conflict resolution that you can use when it gets down to that level. But I'm suggesting that you can avoid that for many situations by starting up at structure and process. The second article is something called "Who's Got My Monkey," which is really a fun one, and it just gives us the language. If you imagine that monkeys are the roles and responsibilities that you have. We all know people who are very happy to delegate their work to somebody else. So they're trying to pass their monkey to somebody. And then we all know people in organizations who are just going to do it just because it's easier to do. And so by using the language of, is this your monkey or should this be my monkey? It's just an awareness tool where we can, with humor, sort of challenge when that dynamic is happening. And then once in a while we get into circuses, but I don't think we have time for that now.
We also, again, I mentioned this earlier, but we'll send those links out in the follow-up email as well, so that if you want to dig further into any of these resources, you have access to them in that email.
Yep, that's great. So once you have your language in place, there are some great projects within organizations that, if you identify them, can be used with a team that just exponentially invests them in mission and supports their growth to understand the holistic nature of an organization. So I've just listed 3 that have been really useful for me in the last couple of years, and everyone can identify those in their organizations. The first is benchmarking, where you would choose 2 or 3 organizations that are similar to you, and you're identifying metrics that you want to compare yourself to. And so it may be around salary, it could be around optimization or cost of goods, or partner relations and agreements. You determine all of those, you evaluate, and it does a couple of things. It definitely highlights where you're performing really well, and more importantly, it identifies those areas that you would like to focus on and improve. We did this in advance of then building a strategic planning process. So it helped us to identify some early areas that we really wanted to jump into strongly. Strategic planning is really the opportunity to involve all stakeholders of an organization in helping to set vision. So it's something that too often I think falls to only a few departments or groups of people in an organization. And I can tell you that the benefits pay out hugely when you can involve all constituents. And you may want to adapt the planning meetings for different stakeholders, but involving everybody and bringing everybody along in that process, invest them in the vision, because ultimately their roles and responsibilities may change as a result of that, and their goals and their job responsibilities might change. So the more you can help them understand the process and what all stakeholders are offering, the more they'll buy into the changes that you're offering. I think a lot of people feel change fatigue with changes in leadership and changes in teams, and this gives you a chance, again, to have a litmus test to explore that. And then the last one is actually really fun and came out of strategic planning, and it's really how we build an external language to the community. If we think about the internal language of, values and the accountability language that we have internally, branding is about how are you talking about your organization to the outside world. And we recognize the need as we trained our employees, and everyone talked about the work that we did differently, and we recognized that we needed a common vision and a common way to communicate that. So we spent a lot of time talking about our work and crystallizing that messaging to short taglines that everybody could buy into and everybody could could adopt and were excited about. And when you think about the ripple effect of all of your employees talking about the work that you do and in a similar way and united around that vision, that's pretty powerful. So, so this is interesting as I think about nonprofit leadership and then leadership in maybe for-profit companies. I think with nonprofit leadership, there's just a little bit less forgiveness in terms of being a leader, and at least from my experience. So I live in a community with 200 nonprofits in a community of 20,000 people, and so it is imperative, I think, that you live and illustrate and breathe your connection to mission. It demonstrates accountability and trustworthiness, honesty and openness, and you need that because you need those outside stakeholders who are really buying in, literally and figuratively, to your organization as funders or people who are connecting with your organization. So I think that's super important. That's something that you can be super transparent about. I think the other thing that's been really interesting, and oh wow, it's definitely been the case in my growth, is that when you come into a nonprofit, and they're younger nonprofits, often you're growing up through the ranks and you find yourself in positions of leadership and management where you may not have the tools or the resources to be able to build your skill set. And you may be assuming, more responsibilities as that nonprofit sort of balances and becomes stable. And so in that case, I think it's really important to find mentors or coaches that can help you, to find peers that you can discuss some of the challenges that you're facing, to be super reflective around the work and your painful growth in leadership, and then to continue to get feedback from your team. So there's also so many resources on leadership now. Mine has really been through experience and some seminars and online opportunities, and that's certainly at very little cost, open to anybody. So find the tools and the skills that you need if they're not provided for you, and be self-directed in that way. And then, okay, this is going to work because Michael Scott is just giving us some thoughts and ideas, both around what it means to have people on your team and the clarity of what real leadership and growth contains, which is not much.
Thank you. So I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
But at this point, I also definitely want to open it up to anybody that has joined us online to ask any questions in the Q&A so we can continue the conversation with April. So one of my questions I have for you is about if you are in a middle management type of role where you're leading a team and you want to embody all of the qualities of being a strong leader. But if you're facing challenges with having, I don't want to say disagreements with the people that are above you, but feeling like the style of leadership that you would like to be modeling and driving your team under is different than what you're seeing above you, and you're having to manage up or managing down, which I know is a balancing act when you're somewhere in the middle of an organizational structure. How do you recommend best managing that?
Oh, that was the last 20 years of my life. I'm kidding. Let's see. The hope would be, I guess, that if you're a middle manager and your style and your approach is different than the leader of the organization, if I'm reframing this right, the hope is that you're both connected to the same mission of the organization, and that you can refer to and feel that you've got common grounding around. And so I think you still embody the leadership characteristics and behaviors that are important to you, recognizing that that leader, for whatever reason, is successful with his sphere or her sphere or their sphere in that arena. And so if you're successful with your team and you can manage up and connect through mission, I think that's success. I worked for a leader who had very poor people skills, if I can say that, and yet was able to leverage uh, resources for the organization in a huge way. And yet he had the wisdom to be able to build his middle management and beyond with people who were very good for people. So our job was to help translate some of his vision and messages to our people. So it does speak also, I think, to having and honoring and being able to be flexible enough to have different styles and different types of people in a team. And that, I think, then helps you translate a different kind of leader, if I can say that.
Advice. Thank you so much. That's really great advice. I was still on mute.
Oh.
Sorry. So another thing that you mentioned, you touched on 2 different times during the presentation, was about the idea of, you mentioned it, of working a million hours, jumping into everything you can as a way of showing that you're part of the team and that you're dependable, and how sometimes that actually can have some negative effects and lead to burnout. And then you also mentioned something about, who's got the monkey, and the people that are willing to take on a ton of work, and the people who are willing to pawn their work off on other people for, which, that happens in organizations. So my question about that is, when you're maybe working towards aspiring a leadership role, I think a lot of times a way of showing your commitment is, people think the more I do, the more I take on, I work late, I work nights, I work weekends, I volunteer for everything. That's going to show that commitment and hopefully drive them towards a leadership opportunity. Do you think that that's a reasonable strategy, or do you think that that's something that actually doesn't get received quite the same way, or yield the results that someone's looking for in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, when I entered nonprofits, that was the way that you would advance. And you were really accoladed for that kind of behavior. But I do think that it builds a martyrdorism, if that's a word, and and people burn out and go away, and that's not what you want. And so I would rather see somebody step up and say, I would be happy to be involved in this if possible. I'd love to have a role because I want to learn, and then learn to delegate. I think delegation, and that's been a really hard lesson for me, to be able to learn to delegate, because I feel like I'm passing monkeys. But if I've developed roles and responsibilities and goals and expectations, I should be able to find that monkey fits in somebody else's responsibility. And so delegation is more important, and curiosity and initiative are really important. But it's okay to say, if I do this, I need to let something else go. And I've seen some really young leaders come in and say, I'd love to take this on. I really need to let something go. And boy, that's a great discipline to have.
Yeah, I bet that by creating those boundaries, I think that also shows that you're, will garner you a lot of respect in a lot of ways. I think people really love when people will create boundaries, but also step up and do so in a way that is modeling that behavior going forward. So I think that's really great.
Yeah.
If there's any questions from the audience, I'd love to plug those too, but I can certainly have more for you. Absolutely. One of the other things that I would love to know your thoughts on is when you have a team in a lot of ways, and I think that sometimes, whether years of being at the organization can be very transparent in a lot of ways. Sometimes salaries are transparent. What do you do when you say you see somebody, either you are looking to promote or grow on your team, or somebody who is fitting really well in the role they're at, but maybe don't have the aptitude to jump into an upper level role? How do you handle keeping good team dynamics if you're looking to promote somebody, especially when there's maybe that comparison piece where somebody is looking at it and saying, well, they've been here 3 years and I've been here 5 years. Why might they be getting the opportunity I'm not? When that person's really thriving in their role, but maybe not in a position to grow, and another person just excelled pretty quickly through their space.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And I think it just gets down to having the conversations early. It's so much around setting the framework for building the move. And I think it's okay to say this, it's really not about the amount of time that you've been somewhere. It's really about taking the organization to the next level. And so if you can take it out of years of experience and say that experience is important, but it's only one aspect of what's going to be needed moving forward. There's a group of skills or an experience set that's needed that's beyond what you've gained within the job here that's needed. So I think it's really identifying those other aspects beyond experience and making sure that you're talking to the entire team around that where appropriate, so that they're also understanding, because the water cooler talk around change in a team can be really hard. So you're being thoughtful about what you can share and how you share it, so that everybody's aware, and building the framework early, I should say.
Yeah. No, that's great. So then what do you think about if somebody is looking to advocate for themselves in either direction? So say that they're feeling really overwhelmed, someone on your team is feeling overwhelmed or in need of additional support, but not necessarily wanting to call attention to the fact that they're having a hard time in their role per se, versus somebody who also is looking to grow and accelerate, but isn't trying to be pushy about that or feels uncomfortable approaching their supervisor about potentially growing. How would you like to see people on your team handle those two situations when it comes to approaching you about them?
So let's see if I'm capturing this. You're saying one employee is advocating for themselves that they have the skill. Can you maybe go through that one more time?
Yeah. So basically one person is struggling and is uncomfortable but needs some help. How do they advocate for themselves in that way? And the other person is looking to grow and they want to advocate for themselves to grow within the organization, but feels also uncomfortable approaching their leadership about that too. So both directions about how to approach leadership appropriately.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really about having that trust and respect, where if people are not meeting their expectations, they can come to you and you're not going to flare. And to be able, and we've had that situation a lot where somebody has, there have been challenges in their job and non-performance. And the more they bring it to me, the more I can help and support them. And when they know that I'm not going to react immediately and emotionally, then they feel like they can do that. And then I always love when people come and say, I want to take this seminar, or, you know, I'd like to take a Friday to do this professional development. If we can figure it out, I love to do that, because, you know, back to this idea of working too much, I would rather people work really smartly. And if they can show that they can responsibly manage their job around gaining extra skills, I'll move mountains to make that happen, because it's going to pay off exponentially. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we actually do have a question from our online audience. Can you give an example of a situation that was maybe an imperfect approach to leadership that you had during your career? What happened, and then what was your favorite career lesson that came out of that?
Let's see. Do we have another hour? So I guess it's really, it is actually around this idea of working responsibly. So when I came into an organization, there was a really tight hold on employees. They needed to arrive by 8. They needed to leave at 4:30. They had to take their lunch. They couldn't sort of work through lunch or run errands at lunch. And I just felt like that was not a way to empower employees around responsibility and autonomy. And so I met with everyone and said, I'd like to look at all your roles and responsibilities. And if you have a strong handle on them, I want you to manage your life. If you need to go or would like to go to your child's theater performance, leave early, but just know that you're responsible for those job tasks. And so we started that, and in a couple of situations it worked beautifully, and in more situations it really didn't, because I think the employees had been in some ways disempowered for so long. There wasn't that reflection of how they needed to get those responsibilities done. So then I had to rewind it, because there were people taking advantage of that, honestly, and say, okay, so we're not quite there yet. How about if we have core work hours of, 9 to 4 or 9 to 3, and you can manage your work or, before that time and after that time, but everybody is here during that time so that we can collaborate and work together on the projects that we need to do. And if you have your child's theater performance, come in and talk to me, and let's create a work plan so that you can still fulfill those responsibilities. So that was my learning. And I shared it with him. I said, I thought we were there, but it just feels like, there's some instances where the office is empty. And so we need to sort of rethink this. So and they appreciated that, and it's worked.
That's so interesting. I actually haven't. So I've always heard of both the 9 to 5 and everybody's there at that moment and leaves at that moment versus the flexible work schedules. But I haven't heard of anyone try to do a hybrid model to try to be able to offer some of that flexibility while keeping a stable core time frame. So I love that idea. I would imagine and what happened? Did that work out better?
Oh yeah, it's working beautifully. Yeah.
Oh, great. Is that at your current organization now?
It is. And,
okay.
and at my previous organization, it was a 24/7 educational setting. And so people had to manage their life around their work because often they had to stay late or come early. And so it was something that was built into the culture, right? And it was also an expectation that you do that as a professional, whereas I was walking into an organization that had none of that history, none of those attributes. And so it just took some time. I let it go too far, and then I had to wind it back in. But
no, that's great. I'm glad to hear it's going really well. That sounds like a great solution to that problem.
Yep.
We have another question from online. Can you offer any tips on coaching employees who lack self-awareness or the ability to self-reflect honestly?
Yeah, if you've been trying to work with that employee and it's not working, then in some ways it can become an issue between you and the employee if you're trying to hold them accountable and they're not reflecting and growing in that way. And so one thing you could consider is getting an outside coach for that employee so that it takes that dynamic away from you and set it as a goal. So you could say, we're all, if we're going to be reflective or we're going to bring integrity to our job, some of that is being honest with ourselves. And so each one of us is going to set a goal around self-reflection. And so you can offer it to everyone and say, in a couple of situations, I want to just make this part of your formal goal, and I want to offer this coaching so that it's something that you can do maybe with more honesty with an outside coach than, and you're saying this to yourself, you're not telling them that, confronting them with that at that point. But getting an outside resource and building it into a framework. And in some ways, though this is an individual issue for an employee, the more you can broadly open it up to the team, then you're not, that employee doesn't feel targeted because it sounds like that maybe that employee is sort of in a tough emotion, emotionally they're charged a little bit. That would be one thought.
Thank you, April. So unless anyone has any final questions that we could take right now, we are right at 1 o'clock. So thank you so much for everything. As people wrap up, I'm going to launch a poll really quick. If before you jump off, if you have a chance to potentially fill out that poll, it's super helpful for us to know whether the webinar was a success, whether you would come back, and if there's anything that we can do to improve in the future. We're always looking to build a better set of resources for our alumni, so the feedback's really critical for us. But other than that, unless there's additional questions, April, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your time. The prep on this webinar, you've been a total joy to work with, and I hope we get to continue to work together in the future and see more of you around the alumni relations events and things that we do. You. Even though you're in Wyoming, we'll work on it.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Michael Scott.
All right. Yeah. No, thank you for Michael Scott too. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.